Good morning, everybody. Welcome back to Crafting and Crime Daily. I'm your host, Rebecca, and I've got another true crime story for you because there's no trials going on this week because it's Thanksgiving. And the one we had planned for next week, well, we know what happened with that. That was the Murdaugh trial, and he's pled guilty, so no trial next week. Hopefully, Law and Crime and Court TV can come up with something for next week. We'll see. It's a tough time for trials. The holidays, things settle. Judges are on vacation, lawyers are on vacation, so we might get a trial, we might not. So I have a true crime story for you. So this one, we're going to go to Notting Hill in the UK. Now, Notting Hill right now it's sort of an affluent neighborhood, but back in the 1940s, they had just gotten out of World War II, and this was sort of a seedy area of the city. It had been destroyed during the bombing by the Germans, and it was, slowly built up over time, but it was a series of these three-story houses on Rellington Place. So number 10 Rellington Place was this three-story house. And what the landlords would do is they would divide up these homes into flats. And 10 Rellington Place was one of these homes that had been divided up. So there was each one had an entire floor of the home, but and some areas of the house were communal. No bathrooms though on inside of any of these flats, so they had to go outside to use a communal bathroom. So there was this bathroom outside, and then there was a wash house also that was communal in the backyard. So on the bottom floor was a couple named John and Ethel Christie. On the second floor was a guy named Kitchens. On the third floor were Beryl and Timothy Evans. Now, Timothy he grew up raised by his mom, and he had a lot of difficulty in school because when he was a young boy, about 8 years old, he cut his foot and he got a horrible infection and it just didn't heal right. And he was always in and out of the hospital. So he missed a lot of school, so he was not exactly what we would call literate. He could like maybe read his comic books, but you know, heavy reading and writing, it just wasn't his thing. So Timothy, he grew up and he's about 5'5", kind of a cocky guy, but he lied a lot. Now, because of his injury, he didn't have to serve in World War II. He couldn't. So he worked instead. But, I had a brother like this. No matter, you could tell him the sky was blue and he'd say, no, it's orange or purple. He would lie all the time. And this was the way Timothy Evans was. We don't know if it was for his own entertainment. Sometimes he would take on an accent that he didn't really have. He'd make up these preposterous stories to entertain people, I guess. So when he was 20 years old, he goes on this blind date and he meets Meryl. And they hit it off right away to the point where they were quickly engaged and quickly married. It was shortly about 6 months after they were married that they found, the first they lived with mom and his sisters. Then they found this place for rent, 10 Wellington Place, the third floor, and they move in. They had to purchase some furniture on sort of a payment plan where they, had to make monthly payments on the furniture and then the rent for the house. And then along comes a baby. The baby was born October 10th of 1948. Her name was Geraldine. By this time, Timothy is working as a delivery driver. So several months after that, roughly July of the following year, Beryl decides she's going to get a job. And the two were always, bickering and arguing, and they loved each other very much, but it was a very sort of violent relationship. He'd get mad at her and allegedly he'd assault her and she'd take him back and, that kind of thing. And then one point he was alleged to have had an affair with someone that they had let stay in their home with them. And Beryl actually kicked Timothy out of the home along with the person that she thought was sleeping with her husband. They went off together And after a few days, she tired of Timothy, and then Timothy came back home, and Beryl took him back. Well, Beryl proceeds to get pregnant and with a second child. She does not want this child. She's like, we are struggling here to make these furniture payments and uh, pay the rent and raise the baby. We don't need another one. And Timothy's like, oh man, you had one, two. What's two? Two. You can have another one. She's like, I'm not having it. So she is trying at this point in time, 1949, abortions in the UK, they were illegal. And but she wanted to figure out, she was going to figure out a way to get rid of this pregnancy, and she tried everything, and nothing was working. So on November 15th of 1949, Timothy shows up at his uncle's house, and he's like, hey, how are you? What you doing? He's like, he makes up some story. He's like, oh, I was out this way on my job, and the car broke down, and can I stay with you for a while? He's like, sure, you can stay with us for a while. Then at one point he goes back to London, Timothy does. So he goes back to his uncle's house, and he tells his uncle, Beryl left me with the child, so I found a couple to watch the baby, and I came back here. Then later on, he changes his story, saying, no, I left her. That's why I let the baby stay with this other couple, because I don't know how to take care of a baby. Meanwhile, Tim's sister and mother, who they had lived with at one point and would often see Geraldine and Beryl, she hadn't seen them in like a month. So she's like, hey, what's going on? So she sends the sister over to 10 Rellington Place to find out what's going on. And she finds the place empty. No furniture, no nothing. So she talks to the downstairs couple, John and Ethel Christie, and they say, oh, Ethel says, yeah, Beryl moved out. I helped her move out. Yeah, I helped her get her things out. And then Timothy sold all the furniture and he left too. So later that month, Timothy walks into a police station, says to the police, I need to talk to somebody alone. So they get him a police officer. The police officer takes him into a room and he says, I need to tell you, I disposed of my wife. So he proceeds to give a statement to this police officer that he had discovered Beryl wanted to terminate the pregnancy by having an illegal abortion, and that Beryl kept trying to attempt on her own to have to abort the baby. She had even told the downstairs neighbor, Ethel, that she wanted an abortion. Beryl went so far as to tell Timothy, this is according to him, that she was going to take her own life if she couldn't abort this baby. So he goes to work, he comes home, she's dead. So he says on November 8th, when he found her deceased, he went to work, quit his job, sold all his furniture, found somebody to watch Geraldine, and he leaves and goes to his uncle's house. Then he proceeds to tell the police that her body is in a storm drain. So the police go out to 10 Rellington Place and they look for a storm drain. They find the storm drain and they cannot get this lid off. Even with the man, like 3 officers, they could not get the lid off this thing. So they finally, um, through chains and machinery, get the lid off this storm drain. Look inside, it's empty. So they go back to Timothy. They're like, we don't think you put your wife in a storm drain. What did you do with your wife? And he says, no, you know what? I just told you that to protect John Christie. I'll tell you what really happened. He says he came home from work on the 7th and was confronted by John Christie because John had found out through Ethel, because Beryl had told Ethel told John. John says, your wife wants an abortion. You should have just come to me because I studied to be a doctor before World War II, and I know how to do them and safely. And Timothy's like, no, I'm not. No, he just dismisses him and says no. So he goes upstairs, and he's greeted by Beryl, and she's like, did you talk to John? And he says, well, yeah, he said he could do an abortion. And she goes, he told me too, and I'm going to have it. So he's like, oh, okay, I guess I got to go along with it now because she's there's no change in her mind. So he goes to work the next day. He comes home from work, and John greets him at the door and says, "Hey, follow me upstairs. Bad news, it didn't work." So they go upstairs and find Beryl. She's in the bed, deceased. So they wrap her in a blanket and they take her out to the kitchen, and they decide to put her in the second floor flat because at this point in time, the the guy, Mr. Kitchens, who lived there, was in the hospital and he was going to be returning anytime soon. So they put her body in there, and John says, "Don't worry about it. I'll take care of it. You get out of here. Sell the furniture and get out of here." And John told him, "Listen, I have a couple there that are willing to take care of Geraldine for you. Just come back later on and get them." So he's like, "Okay." So he hands over the baby to John Christie. John Christie gets this couple to take care of the baby, and this is his second story to the police. So the police, they go to 10 Rellington Place to interview John and Ethel Christie. And John and Ethel Christie are saying, no, no, that's not what happened. John says, "I told him not to have an abortion. I advised against it." You know, Ethel says, "Listen, this was a very unhappy marriage. Uh, it, Tim has a violent temper and has assaulted her many times." Then John proceeds to say that, he saw all this because he was around. He had taken a month off from work because he had this horrible back pain from a war injury and also a terrible case of gastritis. Now, John and Ethel said that Tim told them that Geraldine and Beryl had gone on vacation. And then later on, Tim had told John that Beryl had left him. So, meanwhile, Timothy's saying, "So John and I disposed of," this is his third story now. "John and I disposed of her body." Timothy said he went back to Rellington Place to get Geraldine and was told by John, "No, you need to wait a few more weeks. Come back and get her then." Meanwhile, the police get a search warrant, or they start searching. I don't know if they had search warrants back then. I'm just assuming so. But they start searching 10 Rellington Place. The top flat, they don't find anything. Second floor, don't find anything. Third floor, they don't find anything. They search the backyard, they don't find anything. So they go back to Tim. They're like, "No, we are not finding a body." Meanwhile, Tim is insisting, just John knows the location of the body. So meanwhile, they go back and search again because Tim wasn't changing his story again. He was maintaining the story that John knew where that body was. And John's like, "That's ridiculous. How would I hide a body? I've got back pain and, you know, the runs," for lack of a better word. So the police search again. This time they included this, what do they call that thing? Storage house, wash house, which was used, according to Ethel, it was just used to store things. They didn't really use it that much. But so the police search that, and they go out and they find these wood planks under the sink. So, and it's very dark in this wash house. So they reach behind the wood planks and they feel a bundle. So they move some of the wood planks, and wrapped in a green tablecloth, they find the body of Beryl Evans. Then over towards the door, behind the entrance door, were some other wood planks, and they move those and they find the body of Geraldine, who was only a year old at the time. She had a necktie wrapped around her neck. So the police show John the necktie, and John's like, "Oh, yeah, I've seen Tim wear that necktie. It's his." Now, this is like 3 weeks after nobody has seen the baby, Geraldine, or Beryl. But the weather was really, really cold uh, in Notting Hill, and it basically preserved the bodies so that they were not emitting any odors, and they were in fairly good condition when they were found. So the medical examiner examined Beryl's body and determined that she had been strangled. Both she and Geraldine had been strangled, and that there were no signs of anybody attempting an abortion on Beryl. Also, she had a 16-week-old fetus. So Timothy, come back to Timothy, and they said, "We found Beryl's body," and so he confesses. He's like, "What?" But he's also told that they found Geraldine. Now, Timothy, now he's distraught. So Timothy maintains it's not till this point that he learned that Geraldine was dead. That was his story. And when asked, well, why did you do it? He says, well, she was incurring one debt after another. So he said he took them to the wash house very late at night. First, he took Beryl to the wash house. He waited till John and Ethel had fallen asleep. Late at night, he goes out to this wash house and he puts um, Ethel's body out there. So he takes care of Geraldine for a couple of days and then um, murders her and puts her in the wash house as well. Does the same thing, waits till John and Ethel are asleep, goes down late at night, puts her in the wash house. So where did these wood planks come from? So there were some plasterers that had been hired to work on the roof of the wash house. So they took out some old planks and they had left them in the wash house to so they could be used as firewood. Now, one of the workers says that he didn't put those wood planks in that wash house until November 14th. Now we know the murders occurred on November 7th or 8th, but this is the 14th. So the police they called this guy back in and they're like, no, it must have been the 8th. He's like, no, it was the 14th. I'm positive it was the Friday the 14th. Well, they bullied him for quite some time until he finally changed his story to Tuesday, November 8th, having put the planks into the wash house. So Tim's mother confronts him and he says, Mom, I didn't do it. John Christie did this. And he says, I spent entire night at the police station where they were coaxing me to give the statement. And he couldn't write out his statement because he was illiterate. So they were writing down what he said. So at this point in time, he's charged with the murder of Geraldine Evans and Beryl Evans. But British law was at this point, you could only be tried for one murder. If there were multiple murders, the prosecution needed to pick one to try you for. And then they could bring in evidence of the other murders into the one trial. So the prosecutors decided the best case would be to try him for the murder of Geraldine. So they put him on trial. And their star witnesses were John and Ethel, the older couple that was living on the first floor. They had a lot to say about Timothy murdering his wife. Meanwhile, Tim's attorney had learned that John Christie had a criminal record of theft. Like he stole a car, he had been in prison 3 different times. Even though the prosecution was, have kept maintaining that John was like this pristine, you know, person that had never done anything wrong in his whole life. You know, John Christie was confronted by Tim's lawyer at the trial. Did you do this? You did this, didn't you? And he's like, no. Listen, I'm older. I was off from work because I had horrible back pain and this gastritis, and how would I carry her body anywhere? No, I didn't do this. When the police got on the stand, Tim's attorney got them to admit that they had actually mentioned where the bodies were found before Timothy confessed to putting those bodies in the wash house. So the prosecution got up and gave a 10-minute closing arguments, like open, shut. Like this was not like one of these well publicized trials. It was just your run of the mill murder trial. The defense did their closing, in which they argued that, Timothy didn't do it. It was John Christie. And the jury spent 40 minutes deliberating and came back with a guilty verdict. Timothy later appealed. His appeal was dismissed, and he was sentenced to the mandatory penalty of death. So on March 9th of 1950, Timothy was taken out to the gallows and he was hung. Meanwhile, back at 10 Rellington Place, the building had been sold to a Jamaican person who decided to divide up John and Ethel still lived on the first floor and they weren't going anywhere. So the second and third floor that was divided into separate rooms. He was going to rent out the rooms in each single flat to his Jamaican friends. So John and Ethel decided after a few years, they were like, oh, we have had enough. We're moving. So they decide they're going to move. So the landlord decides he's going to renovate the first floor and probably divide it up. So he's going to renovate the first floor. So he has a worker in there and he's installing these outlets in the kitchen. And he's trying to find a place on the wall to install them. And he discovers that the wall in this kitchen is hollow. So he removes the wallpaper, and hidden there was this alcove, a very small alcove, but very dark and small. And he looks into this alcove and he is startled at what he finds. And that's where I'm going to end it today. So tomorrow, there will be a part 2 to this case. Stay tuned. I hope you guys enjoyed this today. I have to go shopping for the Thanksgiving meal. Yeah, I'm going to walk up to Dylan's with my little wagon. Have a great Tuesday, everybody, and I'll see you tomorrow for part 2 of the Timothy Evans story. Have a great day. Bye.